Good afternoon, students. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to the final lecture of this course. So today we'll be talking extensively of one major important application of smart contracts, and that is initial coin offerings. So in the last lecture, we discussed extensively about what smart contracts are, right? We began with an early discussion about the different generations through which blockchain technology has been developed, starting with the first generation where blockchains were simply used as distributed ledgers, right? Where data was simply stored on the blockchains. And then we saw how people saw that, distributed ledgers, blockchains could actually do much more than just storing data. And in fact, they had the capability to execute contracts on their own. So this led to the creation of smart contracts as part of the second generation of blockchain technology, where certain languages were developed, certain technologies were developed to enable contracts to be coded and embedded onto a blockchain in such a manner that they could be operated in an automated and a self-executing fashion. Now, obviously, smart contracts have a number of benefits. At least the creators of smart contracts, like Vitalik Buterin, who introduced Ethereum into the world, the Ethereum blockchain, proposed a number of potential benefits that smart contracts were meant to provide. First of all, it was trustlessness. Trustlessness meaning the fact that data stored on the blockchain could not be corrupted, that you did not need to know the identity or the details of a counterparty in order to trade with them. Smart contracts were also proposed as involving lower cost because much of the contract execution could be automated, self-running in a way, and therefore this was proposed as being able to bring down costs because that would require lesser human involvement. And lastly, smart contracts and the fact that they operate on blockchains was also promoted as a mechanism to improve transparency. And that was because data stored on the blockchain cannot be altered, it's immutable. And what it does is it allows the verification of transactions long after they have taken place. But the problem is smart contracts have a number of disadvantages. When it comes to actual implementation of smart contracts, it has been seen that they still require a lot of human involvement. Smart contracts still need some kind of human inputs, human verification in order to conduct most of their operations. And sometimes smart contracts also need to interact with the outside world, with third parties, in order to work effectively. So for instance, if you order products online using a smart contract, the smart contract still needs to interface with sensors, it needs to interface with humans in order to determine whether the delivery of the product has actually taken place or not. So you can clearly see that smart contracts nevertheless need to interact with the real world. And that's where one of the major problem arises, because smart contracts cannot be fully automated, right? So they don't have these kind of intelligent capabilities as yet. Another major problem is that current implementations are quite slow. So just for information, most smart contracts, especially on the Ethereum blockchain, are implemented using the Solidity programming language. And it has been found that Solidity is quite a hard language to learn. So not everybody is able to develop smart contracts on their own. And therefore they need to rely on computer professionals who know this language and are able to code in it. And the second problem is running smart contracts on popular blockchains like Ethereum is rather slow. So they're still not ideal for running most business applications, like, especially for larger organizations or where you need transaction processing at a very high frequency. And we have seen some of these problems through a very simple model in the last lecture. So we saw that when one of the key mechanisms that smart contracts try to implement is the need for not placing any trust in the system. So we saw that the basis on which contracts are developed is the notion of trust. So when two parties to a transaction don't have any trust amongst each other, then the only mechanism through which they can transact amongst themselves is in a simultaneous fashion. So you've seen these examples of prisoners being exchanged on a bridge, you know, or spies being exchanged on a bridge, where the two countries or two groups come simultaneously, meet at opposite ends, and exchange their prisoners simultaneously. That happens because both parties do not trust each other. Okay, and but what can be achieved with trust? When the two parties have trust, which is built through various mechanisms, either through prior relationships or through some kind of reputation, the advantage is the obligations of each party can be performed at different times when trust exists. And what smart contracts try to do within this context of trust and contract formation is they promise full automation. They promise some kind of self-execution, and they promote that. They promote the fact that you do not need a lot of trust to get them operational. But the problem is, we saw through the model of Alice and Bob that this is not true. We saw that contracts are only feasible when monitoring costs are low, and more importantly, when the verification costs borne by either Alice or Bob are quite low. When are these low? These can only be minimized when the trust that Alice places on Bob and that trust that Bob places on Alice are high. And smart contracts, at least in the current form, don't seem to provide that level of trust. So you can see that smart contracts are novel. They tend to uh, facilitate contract creation and execution in a way that was never imagined before. They tend to minimize some of the costs due to reduction in human involvement. But nevertheless, they are quite limited in what they can achieve in their current form. So having set out, another major application of smart contracts today is in the form of helping firms and individuals raise money. So today we'll be looking extensively at one form of raising money through smart contracts, or let's say more generally through the blockchain, which are known as initial coin offerings. So we'll see extensively as to what ICOs are. We'll explore the concept of tokens. So this was introduced very lightly in the last lecture. So we'll look extensively at what tokens are, how they facilitate the conduct of initial coin offerings, like how they're important to conduct initial coin offerings, and then we'll look at some economics surrounding the operationalization and the valuation of these tokens. So we'll see some basic tokenomics. So this is a popular term that is used to understand how blockchain economies operate, what drives the value of tokens, and how they depend on different parameters. Most importantly, on how token value depends on the level of adoption by users, by the community. So let's look at the first part in this video. So the most simplistic definition of an ICO is that it helps projects raise money. But the additional condition required for an ICO is that the business idea has to operate on a blockchain. Okay, the idea behind the venture should be operational on a blockchain. It has to operate on the blockchain, and it's only under that consideration that an ICO can be successful. Okay, we'll see why that is. So people who are more naive, people who don't really understand the nitty-gritties of what ICOs are, often tend to compare it with other types of financing, like equity offerings or debt financings or whatever. So many people say that an ICO is nothing but similar to an equity offering, but the only difference is normally in an equity offering you would offer shares to your investors, right? When a firm raises money from venture capitalists, the venture capitalist, in return for providing money, gets shares in the company, gets an ownership stake in the company. Similarly, when a company gets listed on a stock exchange and sells its shares, the public that buys those shares automatically become owners. But the major difference is, even if you for a second believe that an ICO is similar to an equity offering, is the fact that unlike shares that are issued in return for equity financing, in an ICO, investors are provided tokens instead of shares. And why do we need a blockchain? Because an ICO and the tokens that are issued as part of this ICO are implemented, are operationalized using smart contracts. They need to function on top of the blockchain that on which the venture itself functions. So let's say, how do you go about conducting an ICO? In the most generalistic sense, imagine you are an entrepreneur, you have a business idea, and you believe that this idea can run on a blockchain. Okay, it could be as simple as, let's say you want to open a coffee shop. uh, Now a coffee shop is a physical enterprise. Like, you have a physical space where you have tables and chairs. You need to hire baristas to serve coffee, and you need some admin people as well to manage the business operations. Now imagine all these activities can be automated in some way such that they run on a blockchain. You could have smart contracts running on a blockchain that take orders from customers, maybe online or even physically through some sensors. They also take care of the payments. And then you could also hook up these smart contracts to to an automatic coffee machine, which takes in orders and automatically prepares the coffee for customers. So if you're able to have an idea, a business idea that is implementable on a blockchain, then what you do is you conduct an ICO. So to make the business idea work, all you need to do is create some tokens on the blockchain, on a popular blockchain like Ethereum, or build a blockchain by yourself, an independent blockchain by yourself. And then all you do is you distribute those tokens to the investor community. You promote your idea, you promote your venture, you promote your ICO essentially. And then as part of that promotion, as part of this offering process, you issue tokens in return for those investors providing you money. So what you're doing essentially is you're building a decentralized system and raising capital through it, right? So the blockchain that runs your business ultimately runs on a decentralized platform. So another popular example, a real example of an ICO is the case of Bancor. So the Bancor was a startup that raised a ton of money in early 2017. And Bancor is nothing but a decentralized currency platform. So it's an online exchange that runs on top of Ethereum. All of you, I hope, know what Ethereum is. It's the second most popular cryptocurrency out there. But as I said, the main selling point of Ethereum is that it's not meant to work as a cryptocurrency per se, but rather enable people to create smart contracts on its blockchain. And it is the most popular blockchain platform out there for creating smart contracts. So what Bancor did was it wanted to raise money to uh, to create an online crypto exchange where people could trade in different currencies, but it needed funds to do that. So what it did was it created some tokens on the Ethereum blockchain. So these tokens had the symbol BNT, and what they did was they promoted their idea. They approached all potential investors that they could manage to find, promoted their idea, generated some interest amongst these prospective investors, and then one fine day they said we are conducting a token sale as part of this ICO, and then tried to raise a bunch of money. How much money did they raise? It seems that they were able to raise more than $153 million in less than 3 hours. So that's the pace, that's the speed with which money can be raised through an ICO. How does it compare to a typical equity offering? If you take an IPO process, if you take a typical initial public offering or the process through which shares gets listed on a stock exchange, it can take anywhere from 6 months to or even 2 years. If you have a business idea and instead opt to go to a venture capitalist, that process can take anywhere from 6 months, even up to 10 years, depending on how many venture capitalists you need to approach, and depending on how many venture capitalists are previously unwilling to invest in your venture. Okay, so this goes to show that the fact that how new ventures can be funded instantly through an ICO. Okay. How is a typical ICO conducted? Well, all you have to do is just like what Bangkok did. You need to create a smart contract that creates these tokens. You determine how many tokens you want to create. It could be 100 million, it could be 200 million. It's up to you. So you operationalize your tokens using a smart contract, which is built most likely on Ethereum. And then what happens is you conduct a sale in which all interested investors will send you Ethereum. That is the money they provide, the financing they provide. And in return for receiving this Ethereum from individual investors, you give them a token or some tokens in return. Now, the exchange rate between the funds that investors provide and the tokens that you give in return to investors as similar to shares is predetermined. So you have to when you're promoting your ICO, you state how many tokens an investor receives, let's say for every unit of Ethereum that investor provides. So that is predetermined and specified at the very beginning. Now, there are two ways in which tokens can be used. Okay, one is to use the blockchain for customers to access the blockchain itself. Now, imagine you have an ICO trying to build a decentralized cloud storage platform. Okay, and the most popular example for decentralized cloud storage is Filecoin. So what you do here, imagine you want to conduct an ICO to create this decentralized cloud storage solution, and obviously you want customers to use your platform. But then instead of allowing customers to use your platform or access your platform through Ethereum or dollars or any fiat currency, most ICOs require customers to use the tokens in order to access the platform. Okay, so most blockchain platforms that run on smart contracts have their individual tokens, have their respective tokens. And in order for me to store my files or access my files from this cloud storage platform, I need to first possess these tokens and provide them as payment to the platform in order to be able to access it. So that's one use case of how tokens can be used. What if I'm not an investor? I'm just a regular customer that wants to access this solution. Well, I need to, in order to get those tokens, I would probably go to one of the thousands of crypto exchanges out there. And what I would do is, I would first purchase the tokens in return for the money that I have. So I could pay dollars or Bitcoin or any other popular cryptocurrency that I have and get tokens instead. Okay. The opposite use case is if I want to get back my money in regular form in dollars or NOK or in Bitcoin, I can again go back to these exchanges and check which of these exchanges trades in this token. And so if I can exchange my tokens in return for other forms of money. So this is a typical place where investors who initially purchase these tokens try to get back their investment by trading their tokens for other regular currencies. Now, how are these ICOs conducted? Like what kind of tools do these ICOs use or the people behind these ICOs use in order to promote their idea, or especially to prospective investors? Well, in most cases, the most obvious tools of promotion for these ICO entrepreneurs is through websites. So most ICO entrepreneurs, what they do is create a website and provide a number of different pieces of information on that website. So here is an example of an ICO that was conducted, I think in 2018. And it's an ICO it's a business idea which is called Napoleon X. So what did Napoleon X do? They created a website, and within that website, they provided a number of pieces of information. So first is they created a white paper. It's a typical PDF, let's say of a few pages, where they detail their entire business idea. They describe what they are creating, what kind of technology they are creating, what their venture is, how much money they are seeking, what do they provide in return, how will investors be compensated for providing that investment, and various other things. So the white paper details all such facts. Secondly, they also provide details of the team that is involved in developing the product. So here you see a group of individuals who are working in this venture, so they team up. They also provide details of ownership. So they provide information on how much each individual owns, how much an investor will get in return for providing their investment. And they also provide details of the token sale program itself. So they'll say that, we are planning to conduct an ICO sale from this and this date up to this and this date. Typically, it's usually for around 2 weeks to 2 months. And they say that, if you get on early, you'll get some extra incentives as an investor. Whereas if you enter later on, you're treated as a regular investor. So all such details of the date of token sales, how much money the firm is looking to raise as part of the ICO, and various other related facts are provided as well on this website. Now, usually one thing you'll notice is most of these ICO teams try to promote themselves as very professional. And as part of that, they award themselves a lot of very cool titles. Like there's always a CEO, there's always a COO, and various other titles, just in a bit to make them seem more professional than they actually are. It could be that these guys are just high school kids trying to raise money, and it actually happens very often. But then, this is one form of signaling in order to attract as much money as possible and ensure that the ICO is successful. In addition to this website, many ICO teams actually use other social platforms to promote themselves. So typically you find a lot of ICOs being promoted on Telegram, which is a social messaging app, and also on Medium, which is a popular blogging site. So here they publish articles, they answer questions from prospective investors, trying to address information problems, the information asymmetries that we have talked all along, over a number of weeks or months. All these efforts are, once again, to resolve adverse selection within the market, within the ICO market as much as possible, and try and attract as much investment as they can. So here you see an example, a screenshot of the actual token sale program. So here you can see the amount that the team is trying to raise. So they say that their target is about 15 million euros equivalent. Okay. They show how long the ICO sale lasts. So here you can see that at the time the screenshot was taken, the information on the website showed that the token sale was still open for another 23 odd days. They also show that so far they had raised up to 50% of the target amount. And they had done it in a number of ways. So they had attracted funding through Ethereum. They had attracted money in actual euros, and they also attracted some funding in Bitcoin. So it again depends on how you want to fund yourself. You can try and raise money through different currencies, but ultimately the thing is, this Napoleon X company is trying to be a crypto asset manager. So it sort of says that this is a platform that wants to store assets on the blockchain. God knows what those assets are. But the Napoleon X token that is issued in return for investors providing this money is hosted on the Ethereum blockchain. Okay, but through the creation of relevant smart contracts. Here, another important feature that you find on the website is the distribution of the tokens. So here you see how many tokens are being issued. So in total, for raising 15 million euros, the ICO team says that they would like to issue about 50 million NPX tokens in total. So NPX here refers to the symbol of the token that is being issued to the investors for this platform. Out of the 50 million tokens, only 70% of all these tokens will be issued to the public. The remaining 15% will be held by the founders, possibly for further sale in the future, and 13% is being saved for advisors. Now, these advisors are similar to board members who, try and advise the company, try and steer it towards a path of success. Okay, and then here they also list how they intend to use the funds. So they say that 12.5% of the money raised will be used for PR or marketing, 5% for legal compliance, 30% for HR costs like salaries and stuff, and only 25% will be used for developing the actual infrastructure, the product or service. So you get all these different details from these websites and through these social platforms. But here's an interesting question. Do you think buying tokens is similar to buying stocks? Pause this video for a second and think about it. Why do you think it's similar, or why do you think it could be different? Now, if you compare, let's take the first context where you're considering what do I get by investing in stocks. Now, typically, a company trying to raise money by issuing shares, by issuing stock, is organized as follows. You have the operating organization, the company, which it generates some economic activity, it creates some goods and services, it has some money with it, and it has certain assets. And what the company does is it raises money, it raises funds. It utilizes the assets under its control to produce some goods and services. And once it sells those goods and services, it gets an economic reward in return. Now, obviously, the founders that created this organization put in their labor, they contribute their labor and gain ownership and some rewards in the form of salaries and the form of bonuses in return for creating this organization and producing goods and services from it. What do the outside investors get? So outside investors are the ones who actually provide a bulk of the funds. Well, they also get ownership. They buy the stock, and consequently they get ownership in return for providing their investment. So what happens is ultimately, when it comes to investing in stocks, the organization has at least two different types of owners. One is the founders, the entrepreneurs, and the other is the investors themselves. What happens when you invest in tokens? Well, here's where the major difference comes in. As far as the founders are concerned, nothing much changes. They remain owners. They have an ownership stake in the company. They provide labor and try to create goods and services. But what happens in the case of outside investors who are actually providing the money through the ICO is the fact that they do not get ownership of the company itself. Most ICOs do not provide any kind of ownership to the investors. Instead, all they promise in the white papers is the fact that they can get ownership of any future product or service that the company manages to develop. So here's the danger. Most ICOs or the ventures that are built using ICO money don't even have a working prototype to start with. So all they are doing is trying to promise some future product or service that the company hopes to develop and have a working product that can be sold. And they're offering these outside investors ownership of any future product or service and any future cash flows that may arise from developing those products and services. So compared to these investors who are buying stocks, investors in tokens bear a lot more risk. And you can see how risky it is to buy tokens from these white papers. So typically, if you look at Napoleon X's white paper, at some point in the middle of the document, you'll see these interesting statements. So here, Napoleon X's white paper says that an NPX token doesn't represent an investment. So at the very outset, the founders, the team members are saying that even though you provide your money, we do not call it an investment. So that's the first red flag. Secondly, they're saying an NPX is not a proof of ownership. So they're saying in return for providing money, you do not get any ownership or right of control in the firm or in its activities. Thirdly, they say that an NPX is not a currency. It's not an electronic currency. Then what is a token? Second, third, fourthly, it is not meant to be used as a payment service. And all NPX says is it's just a token that can be used by the platform. So all they are saying is Napoleon X hopes to create an asset trading platform, a decentralized asset trading platform. And all they are saying is that NPX can only be used as a token to use that platform, either by the investors or any future customers. So my question is, given these features of the token, would you still be interested to put your money into that company? It turns out that not everyone is willing to, but there's still a lot of interest in funding these kind of companies through ICOs. Now, again, one thing I want to emphasize is if you are really interested in investing your money in an ICO, you have to really look into the detail. You have to look at the fine print. So imagine we compare a white paper, which is the only document available in most ICOs that actually describe the business plan, compared to an actual business plan, which is used by most traditional entrepreneurs to raise money from venture capitalists or angel investors. You see, there are a number of differences. First of all, a business plan typically contains not only describes details of the business idea, but it also contains a number of other elements like financial projections, SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, or opportunities and threats. And most entrepreneurs would also have conducted an extensive market analysis just to be aware of how good their idea is, how viable their idea is. Compared to this, most white papers don't contain any of these features. They simply provide a lot of details of the technical implementation of the blockchain idea. They provide details of security and use cases, but no work is done on actually giving financial projections, which is of the utmost interest to most investors, at least those who are traditional. What is a value proposition? In a typical business plan, the value proposition is about the company, the products and services that the company develops, its employees, right? The skill of the employees, and ultimately the customers. Contrastingly, in a white paper, the value proposition is mostly about the crypto asset, the token that is being developed. Okay, we'll see why this emphasis on token exists. Okay, uh, how are investors incentivized? When you approach investors with a business plan and try to raise some VC money, let's say, typically the incentives to investors are in the form of ownership. Many investors also gain a seat on the board, and ultimately they take a share of the profits in the form of dividends or capital gains on their shares. Instead of providing similar types of incentives to investors, the only type of incentives given to ICO investors is in the tradability of the tokens. So most ICOs say that, because our token is going to be used to access and use the platform, that will naturally gain some value due to network effects, due to an increase in the customer base. And naturally, the value of the token itself will appreciate as it gets traded more and more on exchanges. So the only promise, the only types of incentives offered to ICO investors is based on the tradability of those tokens, and also on the mining bonuses and the fees on transactions that is charged by the blockchain itself and the node and the constituent nodes. Thirdly, there's in terms of supply of the stocks or tokens. In the case of stocks, the supplies were theoretically unlimited. A company can issue as many shares as it wants. Of course, with every subsequent share that is issued, the ownership stake of the existing investors gets diluted, right? Whereas in the case of an ICO, the number of tokens that can be created is preset. It's predetermined at the very beginning, and therefore it's limited. Okay. And typically, a business plan is very short. It has to be very crisp. It has to be very well organized. And typically, a very sound business plan would not exceed 15 pages. In contrast, a typical white paper can even run into hundreds of pages. The idea that's the strategy adopted by most ICO entrepreneurs is to provide as much technical detail as possible. Try and make it sound as complex as possible, in the hope that investors will be attracted to those details, to those technical details. You can also compare ICOs with other traditional forms of financing. So let's say venture capital or crowdfunding that we have talked about in one of the previous lectures. Now, as far as the team is concerned, most team members in ICOs are highly technical professionals. There's no credence given to having people who have skills in financial management, who have skills in managing the people itself. Most of the team members in ICOs are highly technical people. Whereas in most other startups, you have people with highly rich domain experience. you have people not only with technical expertise, but also business experience. Okay, and this is highly valued, especially by venture capitalists that fund more startups. Ownership, again, no type of none whatsoever is promised by ICOs, whereas when VCs require an equity stake, an ownership in the company that they fund. In many cases of crowdfunding as well, investors receive some form of equity for providing their funds. Again, given the lack of due diligence in ICOs, or extensive due diligence in ICOs, money can be raised pretty quickly through an ICO, whereas in the case of crowdfunding or venture capital, it's often very time consuming. What are the prerequisites? Here, in the case of VC and crowdfunding, you would typically not only need to have a business plan, or make a very promising pitch to your prospective investors, but in many cases you also need to have a working prototype. You need to show some promise that you're developing a viable product. No such prerequisites are usually followed or required in the case of ICOs. Therefore, this is a very risky market. Thirdly, most of the sales are also conducted online, right? In the case of venture capital or crowdfunding, let's say more so in the case of venture capital, the investor gets to meet the entrepreneur face to face. Crowdfunding is rather less strict about it. I mean, the level of interaction between prospective investors and the entrepreneurs is rather minimal. And it's even worse in the case of ICOs, where you do not even know whether the team members that are described, that are introduced on the ICO website, are actually real or not. I can simply put a fake LinkedIn profile of somebody else who's far more advanced, who's much more of a geek than myself, and there's no means for an investor to verify whether that information on the team members or on the project itself that is put up on the ICO website is true or not. What are the other major factors? Obviously, liquidity is one key attraction, because of the fact that tokens are traded on thousands of crypto exchanges, if not hundreds. The advantage is that tokens tend to be quite liquid, at least during the initial phases, and therefore this is one of the key drivers that is attracting a lot of money into ICOs. In comparison, most of the stock held by venture capitalists is highly illiquid, because these are held in private, and in fact the stock held through crowdfunding is also highly illiquid. So this is one of the key factors which is attracting a lot of money into this industry. What about the public perception? Well, obviously many people, including academicians, don't perceive ICOs in a positive light, but that hasn't really stopped money flowing in, at least until last year. And obviously, accessibility is rather easy. As an entrepreneur, it's very easy for you to set up a website and conduct an ICO sale. And in fact, we see that as researchers, we see that a lot of entrepreneurs are actually trying to go this way, because they don't want to end up, or they do not prefer going to a lot of venture capitalists, knocking on a lot of doors and trying to convince people, and instead they believe that it's much more easier to conduct an ICO, and therefore, because of the fact that you can expend less effort through an ICO, is one of the key reasons why a lot of entrepreneurs are preferring to raise money through this route. Okay, but in reality, what has happened is, in the last 1 year or so, the cryptocurrency markets have essentially crashed, and that has also dented the hopes of entrepreneurs when it comes to raising money through ICOs. Okay, so this concludes the first part of our lecture. I hope you enjoyed getting some insights into what ICOs are and how tokens matter, and also I hope you enjoyed understanding what some of the major issues with ICOs are. Okay, so let's end the lecture here. In the second part, we'll be looking at some very, very basic models that explain how tokens derive their value, and what factors does their value depend on. Okay, thank you.